America's first war, the fight that created a nation America, was not born in comfort or certainty. It was born in tension. Before there was a United States, there were 13 British colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast. The people who lived there were ordinary. Farmers working the land, merchants running small shops, families simply trying to survive. They were loyal to the British crown, believing they were part of a powerful empire that protected them. At first, that loyalty felt secure. But everything changed after Britain emerged victorious from a costly war in Europe. The empire was exhausted and deeply in debt. To recover, British leaders turned their attention across the ocean. The colonies, once partners, were now seen as a source of revenue. New taxes were imposed on daily life, paper, tea, trade. The issue was not just money, it was control. The colonies had no representatives in the British Parliament. Laws were passed without their consent. Voices were ignored. Rights were dismissed. A single idea began to spread from town to town: taxation without representation. That idea became dangerous. Resistance grew quietly at first. Meetings were held in secret. Pamphlets circulated. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Then came an act of open defiance that shocked the British Empire. One cold night in Boston, men disguised themselves and boarded British ships anchored in the harbor. Crates of tea were smashed open and thrown into the dark water below. No demands were made. No speeches were given. The message was simple and impossible to ignore. Britain responded with force. Ports were shut down. Trade was strangled. Soldiers marched into colonial streets. Homes were searched. Freedom felt closer than ever and further away than before. Most people did not want war. They had families to protect and lives to maintain. But when armed troops occupied their towns and laws tightened around their daily existence, neutrality became impossible. Ordinary people were dragged into history. Farmers picked up muskets they had never fired in battle. Teenagers stood in lines meant for trained soldiers. Neighbors argued. Communities divided. Fear spread, but so did resolve. Then a single gunshot changed everything. The first clash between colonial militia and British troops marked the beginning of a war no one believed the colonies could win. The British Army was the strongest in the world, professional, disciplined, backed by the most powerful navy ever known. The colonies had almost nothing in comparison. They lacked training, supplies were scarce, winters were brutal. Disease spread quickly through camps. Many soldiers deserted, believing the fight was hopeless. Defeat seemed inevitable. Yet the war did not end. At the center of the struggle stood a leader who refused to surrender. George Washington was not a flawless general. He lost battles and made mistakes. But he understood something essential. Survival itself was a victory. When soldiers froze and starved, he stayed. When hope disappeared, he remained. His presence held the army together when nothing else could. Then, against all expectations, the tide turned. A decisive victory shocked the world and proved the colonies were not helpless. Foreign nations took notice. France, long an enemy of Britain, chose to support the American cause. Supplies arrived. Troops followed. The balance of power shifted. The impossible began to feel achievable. The war dragged on, demanding more sacrifices. More blood was spilled. More lives were lost. But the final confrontation brought the struggle to an end. British forces, surrounded and exhausted, surrendered. The fighting stopped. America emerged not as a colony, but as a nation. Independence was declared, but freedom remained a work in progress. The ideals written into the foundation of the country were bold and revolutionary. Power would come from the people, not a king. Laws would rule, not fear. The consequences of that war reshaped the world. A new nation stood as proof that an empire could be challenged, that ordinary people could change history, that freedom once imagined could be fought for and claimed. Modern America traces its identity back to that struggle. A conflict born from frustration, sacrifice, and courage. A war that asked a question still relevant today. What is freedom worth, and who is willing to stand for it when the cost is everything?